There is no such thing as being behind. Everywhere you are right on time. So if you're wandering in the wilderness right now, that's where you're supposed to be. There's some mystical way in which this is true. I feel pretty convinced of it because what I know is that no amount of nagging or no amount of convincing from someone else or whatever will ever convince you or me to change until something in us says, I want to change.
Yeah, so true.
I want things to be different.
It's so true.
I want to walk this way instead of that way. So until that happens, then you are where your heart's desire is leading you.
What's up, damn givers? Welcome to Let's Give a Damn. I'm Nick LaPara, your friend and the host of this podcast. I truly hope each and every one of you are doing fantastic. I don't know about you, but our home has been somewhat of a hospital for the last week. Most of us have been down and out with the flu, the dreaded flu. And I have 3 kiddos, and when one kiddo gets it, it's really difficult to keep it from making the rounds. But we are pretty much healthy. We are on the mend. And I want to say to you, I hope you and yours are healthy and stay healthy. My guest today is just wonderful. Audrey Assad is not only a friend, but she's also a favorite artist of mine and ours, a favorite artist of ours. Our whole family loves her. If you stick around our house for any length of time, you will inevitably hear someone say, "Hey, Alexa, turn on Audrey Assad," and she will come on and serenade us in our home. And you probably know that I don't listen to too much music outside of classical music, Broadway tunes, and some operas. But Audrey is one of those exceptions to that rule of classical music and Broadway tunes because she's not a classical artist or a Broadway star. But she is one of those exceptions. Her music is spiritual and Christian in nature, and that has helped me and our family so much over the years in our spiritual journey. I'm describing to you Audrey, the artist, but we don't actually talk much about her music in our conversation. We do talk about her father, a Syrian refugee, and his family migrating to the United States. We talk about her faith. We talk about pornography. We talk about refugees and immigrants, and so much more. I truly enjoyed my hour with her, and I hope you will too. Stick around to the very end so I can share an event that is coming up that you'll want to be a part of if you can. So without further ado, this is the Let's Give a Damn podcast, and here's my conversation with Audrey Assad. Audrey Assad, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you. Me too.
Let's begin with your story. I know, the bits of your story that are out there. I've seen you tell your story in part during talks, or I saw a 6-minute video at one point. Either way, a lot of people listening probably won't know much of your story, and there's several reasons why I want you to tell it because it'll come into play later on. So begin by telling me your story, as little or as much as you want to.
Yeah. I was born in New Jersey, and I live in the South, which is a whole other world. I've been here for 10 years in Nashville. Grew up in New Jersey, lived there till I was 18. So I was really born and raised in the Northeast and all of its saltiness and Dunkin' Donuts. And I was raised in a very charming New England town with Italian Irish immigrants. It's a soccer town. So that was kind of my context. Tiny Cape Cod houses, shady streets, think like Manchester by the Sea, with a little bit less of an accent, So I grew up there, and my mom's American, my dad is Syrian, so I'm half Syrian. I grew up in a multi-ethnic household. We had a lot of the food, the music, some of the traditions, and it was sort of woven into our lives. I had a lot of family in the area on my dad's side.
That was a question I had, did you have with other Syrians around?
Yeah. My dad's brother and his family, and then my dad's sister and her family, and my grandmother were all local to me. So
did they all come over at the same time?
Oh yeah, we did a lot of that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I meant like when your dad came over from.
Oh yes, they did. Yes, yeah. They all came here in 1973. Okay. So my dad, his brother and sister, and my grandmother. They were my dad was young. I mean, they were 18, but they came over in 1973 from Lebanon. So they were refugees from Lebanon to the States, but they had previously run from Syria under cover of night from a very volatile home situation and lived in Lebanon for 2 years trying to get refugee status to come here or to come anywhere. You can't really pick where you're going. But
Right.
They did end up in New Jersey, and then my dad stayed there up until he moved to Florida 15 years ago.
What was going on back then in Syria? Was it the same shit that's going on right now? Or
No,
what was
not
going?
at
Because
all.
most people didn't think about Syria before
Not
the
at all.
last
Yeah,
few years.
nothing was
But this
going
is back
on
in the
till-
70s.
Right. It was relatively peaceful then. I mean, I think entirely. So they have a unique story because what happened was that my grandmother divorced my grandfather. He was an addict and a gambler and abusive and volatile. And when she divorced him in small claims court in Syria, it was taboo, incredibly culturally taboo to do that. And so her family basically disowned her for doing it. And so she and my dad and my aunt and uncle were in dire poverty. Not only that, the reason they left Syria at all was that my grandfather became a convert to Islam, which is not a problem, except that when he did so because in that culture at that time, Islamic men hold custody rights over their children automatically. And he was in deep debt from gambling and wanted to marry off my aunt to a creditor. So it wasn't a true conversion. It was a business deal.
Sure.
That involved my aunt. And my grandmother was, adamant that wouldn't happen. So that very night, she packed the kids up in a taxi. They went to Lebanon with no papers and then they were living, they were homeless and they were trying to get some kind of protection from the state there, like asylum or whatever. So she was going to diplomats' homes, like finding out where they lived and knocking on their door, pleading her case, like a poor woman, we've all had a moment where someone walks up to us telling us their story all of a sudden and saying they need help. And I try to pause every time. I'm not always perfect about it because I think about her and how I knew her. And she was not, whatever we think people are when they come up and start telling us about their crazy story and what they need desperate help for right now. But she literally went to people's houses, knocking on the door, asking for help. Finally, someone said, okay, I think we can help you out. We'll figure something out. And so he ended up being able to give them refugee status due to their poverty and due to the duress they were under from her husband. And so there was some provision by the law for her situation as a refugee. So she became a refugee and then they were sent here. I never met my grandfather. He was murdered weeks after they left for a gambling debt. So that's a very sad end to that part of the story.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that everybody's safe and they made it over.
Yes.
They made it here to safety.
Yeah, they did. And they, if I can wax elaborately about my dad and my uncle because of what they achieved here. I'm astounded by it every time I tell the story. They moved to New Jersey. They had nothing and no one, and they knew no English. And my dad stayed up at night watching Mork and Mindy and Nickelodeon and learning English from television. And they got jobs, my uncle and my dad, sweeping the floor at a handbag factory in Jersey City, New Jersey, which is, I lived there when I was a kid. And my dad hated it. He hated that job. And he ended up, after a year of doing it, he called the man who had brought them over because there was a man who had helped out with resettling them and getting them plugged into a church. And this man had also sponsored my dad. My dad was a sponsored child in Syria. That's how poor they were. They were in a child sponsorship program.
Yeah.
And he was still someone they knew here, the only person they knew here, really. And so he went to him and he said, I can't do this job anymore. I can't sweep the floor there. I hate the job. I hate the hours. They're mistreating me, all this stuff. Can you hire me? I'll do anything, And so this man says, sure, I'll put you to work. And he has him just start filing papers, which is, I think any of us who've run a business know, it's not really a job unto itself, but I think he just really felt for my dad and was like, I'll help you learn English. I'll help you out. And so it was at an insurance agency. He was a State Farm insurance agent. And so my dad started, he put up the alphabet on the wall and started filing papers. And within 2 years, he was that agency's top selling agent. So he learned the business and really did well. And then within 7 years, he was State Farm Insurance's top selling agent in the whole country for years and years in a row. So he really excelled at what he learned there. He began selling for Mutual of Omaha and became their top selling agent in the entire country. So my parents were always going on these trips. I'm like, why are you going to Switzerland? Because they got all these trips because he kept winning.
That's amazing.
I mean, it really was. I mean, the more that I didn't know that at the time, but when I realized later the extent to which he excelled, having no education, speak of past, he went to night high school, while he was here. He was already 19 when he started, something like that,
How many years between watching cartoons learn English and becoming a top
9
agent? That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It really is. And then my uncle, meanwhile, was on his own trajectory from the handbag factory. He loved what they were doing. So he learned how to use the machines and he started sewing. So he became a sewer. And then he became the floor manager. And then he worked his way up and up and up. And he ended up being a high-level employee at Donna Karan, New York at first. Just, again, no education in the field, but just an excellent mind for detail and for construction. So then he was Coach Leather, hired him as their head engineer, and he was there for like 25 years. Engineering. So every Coach handbag that you would see on the shelf was something that the designer would design and then send to my uncle. And he'd say, yes, we can construct this, or no, we can't. And here's what we need to change. And so just the two of them, they were so driven and so smart and so unflappable.
Yeah.
I'm in awe of that,
That's amazing.
And anything I've inherited from that, I'm so grateful for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
It's pretty crazy.
That's wonderful.
So anyway, that's their story that
And that's
I went onto their story instead of mine, but it's still mine,
No, totally. That's where I want you to go, because that truly is your story. Everything my parents and my siblings do is part of my makeup.
It absolutely
like it
is. It's the culture you're raised in, the air you're breathing as a child, and
so you're most known for your music,
right?
When did that start for you? So was that pre the 10 years here in the South, or when did all that happen? 'Cause
Yeah, so I've always played and sung. It's always, honestly, as long as I can remember. I've been playing piano since I was 2, and I've been singing since earlier than that. And I was always musical. I didn't start writing music till I was 19 years old. So there was like quite a gap between my desire to do it for fun and where I am now. I ended up kind of I was raised in a church culture where women could not even sing in front of mixed gender rooms because it was considered, it was considered to be like preaching, which would be like usurping the authority from all the males, from all the penises in the room.
That's right. What denomination or background was this?
Plymouth Brethren.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Google it, everyone. It's fascinating. I mean, I still read a lot about it. I'm very fascinated by how I was raised, even though I've had a lot of recovery to do in therapy, which I've done a lot of. And now I'm able to look at it and with some compassion and, therefore myself as well. Because, as you know, it's like when you hate things about your past, you usually have some self-hatred mixed up in there. So as I've dug out of that, I see how much it shaped me in certain ways. But one thing that I'm grateful for is that it was a singing tradition. Like, we had this beautiful, incredible practice of a cappella singing, 4-part harmonies. I learned to sing and blend there and listen to other people while they're singing as well. So it was like choir every meeting we were in. I learned to read music there. So, so I wasn't permitted to do anything publicly, singing wise. And so when I was 19, I was just starting to get to that age where you begin to ask the big questions about everything you've ever been taught. Some people do that in high school. I didn't do that.
No, mine was later.
Yeah. And so
that might be because we were taught not to.
Yes. The stakes were high.
Yeah, I'm already teaching my little kids to, don't just take my word for it. Like, and they're 4, 5, and 7.
Yeah.
You know, but I didn't get that until it was
No.
just don't question anything. You fucking do what you're
Absolutely.
supposed to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the stakes were high. It was
Yes.
like eternal conscious torment.
Yes.
So I'm like, oh, well, I'm definitely never questioning anything. So until I was 19, I really didn't get any nerve up to do that. And then I turned 19, and it's funny. Like I had an experience where I look at it now and I think, oh, how religious, you know, but it was real. There was something real that happened in my room at 1 a.m. one night, and I essentially experienced some kind of encounter with God's love that was different than anything I had experienced before. And it involved a lot of shame I was carrying because I had a pornography addiction. And that was something that, of course, I was not talking about to anyone because
Definitely not in that arena.
No. And I had a lot of shame about it, a lot of crippling, toxic shame about that. And I think a lot of people do when they experience something in that regard, but it was compounded by the whole environment for sure. So I ran downstairs and talked to my parents about it in the middle of the night, like a little kid, you know, got in bed and was like crying and I'm like, I have to talk to you. And I had this like deep spiritual experience of love and acceptance from God and forgiveness. And I don't even know if forgiveness is the right word. I don't know if I think God was forgiving me for anything. I don't think God forgives people, but
Sure.
In that moment, I think I finally realized I cleared that cobweb out of the way and I knew what I wanted to do for the first time. I think I had really been unable to sort of sense my own desires and my own, you know, dreams because I had this shame blanket just covering everything like a gravity blanket, you know? So when that started to go away, I suddenly realized, oh, I think I want to sing and write songs. And so I started writing songs and that was that. I really never looked back. I had a job and I was in school, but I dropped out of school because it was expensive. I was going to a private college and I was like, this is so much money. I don't know what I want, you know, so I left and then I was like, I'm just going to give music a try for 1 year and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, I'll come back. And I did. And I never looked back from there. That was really it. I really caught the bug and just kept going. I've never paused.
Well, super side note. We listen to your music all the time, and I'm not just saying that. We really, really do.
Thank you. I'm very honored, honestly.
It's always playing on Alexa. Alexa, play Audrey Assad. I'm going back in a memory here. I don't remember when you became. We'll talk about you becoming Catholic when that happened.
Sure.
But I don't remember when that was. But I do remember first encountering your music a decade. I don't know, a while ago, and people always. Because I was still I was coming out of fundamentalism, like Baptist fundamentalism, 15 years ago. And people would always, when they would recommend your music, they would always caveat it with, but she's a Catholic. Because growing up in fundamentalism, Catholics weren't Christians.
Definitely
like,
not okay.
Christian,
oh, we were taught that.
right?
Absolutely.
So they were always like, oh, her music is so good, but she's a Catholic. Or, oh, this, but she's a Catholic. And I always remembered that. I never thought that way about Catholics. In fact, I'm Anglican, but an Anglo-Catholic. Like I very much teeter-totter. And I never thought that, and I never understood that, but I just think that was so funny.
It
that
is
people always
funny.
had the caveat,
I'm not surprised by that at
she's a
all.
Catholic. But you brought up porn, so let's talk about porn.
Sure, let's talk about it.
I remember listening to your Q talk,
Yeah.
The short, like 8-minute talk. And so I want you to talk about girls in porn,
Sure.
right? Women in porn, because you made it clear, and I had a long addiction with porn, growing up. I was also someone that never, very similar upbringing. No one ever had the talk. My dad was, God love him, but I love him. But there was never the talk there. There was never the talk like, hey, this is coming.
No.
Here's what you should know about. These feelings are normal. None of that.
No,
Zero.
no,
Nothing.
I mean, nothing either.
And so at 16 years old for me, which is way later than most boys, I finally, encountered two things: pornography and masturbation. Like I didn't even know those. I literally didn't know those existed until 16, right? And anyway, but people, even still today, 2019, think it's primarily a dude problem.
Right.
Right. It's dudes that watch it. It's dudes look at it. It's for dudes, and that's not the case, is it?
No,
Let's
not
talk
at
about
all.
this, because I think I actually have there's more women that listen to this podcast than men.
Okay.
For some odd reason.
Hey, gals.
And so talk to them for a moment
Yeah,
about pornography and women.
absolutely. So I want to be sensitive, even as I say these things, to my own changing beliefs about sexuality and what is moral.
Sure.
I don't have extreme, honestly, moral objections to many things anymore, because I have not found that having a primarily moralistic viewpoint on everything actually works to deliver people from things like addiction or from whatever it is that's plaguing them. It's not really my approach. So I just don't want to say I really have tried in my own life to really get out of the sort of guilt, shame, moralistic viewpoint of things and look more at what brings wholeness. It can look slightly different for different people, right? So, but I will say this. I think science and psychology are backing up, in a rare instance of backing up what the church is concluding about something.
Yes.
Very rare
Doesn't happen
instance.
very often.
I think we're seeing more and more studies now about the effects of porn on the brain, on capacity for intimacy, things like that. Of porn addiction, of compulsive porn usage.
Yeah.
Maybe not like 1 or 2, 10 times viewing pornography, but of a really heavy habit. It can really wreak havoc on our ability and capacity, our ability to maintain our capacity to hold things like intimate relations with other people, with real human beings in our room, you know. So pornography and masturbation are two totally different topics, even though they do intertwine most of the time.
Yes.
So I'm just going to say this. You know, pornography is something that most studies are showing that kids across all genders encounter by the age of 8 or 9. At this point, it's so easy to find it. It's so easy to see it. It exists in many forms. It's like porn on Pornhub. It's naked text from your classmates.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, all of these different iterations of seeing a naked body of a human that's not standing in front of you and being titillated by it. That exists in many ways. And so, but kids across the board are experiencing it very young with absolutely no preparation in most cases. And so, because I mean, I think about my 4.5-year-old and the idea of him seeing pornography in 3.5 years, I'm so terrified.
Yeah, you just said 8 or 9 and I have a 7-year-old and now I'm sweating.
Yeah, we should be.
Yeah.
Because, but we should be, but not that much, because really I think about it and I go, you know what? Instead of feeling afraid, the best thing to do with anything with our kids is to give them permission to talk to us and
100%.
ask us questions. Not just permission, but model that that's a good and healthy thing and that they're never going to be punished for it. You know, we can help them navigate what it is to be a sexual being because they are a sexual being.
Very.
We all are,
Yep.
you know, and one thing I wish I'd been given, and I hear you say that you didn't get, I wish I had been given the celebration of sexuality. The idea that, oh, you are a sexual being because you have a body. This is beautiful. This is so good. You know, I got some of that later, but it was more like protected at all costs. Don't become damaged goods. You don't want to be a piece of already chewed gum. You know, that's not dignifying.
Nope.
That's objectifying. And so one thing I do try to celebrate is that I go, you know what? I am scared that my son's going to see pornography so early and potentially have a lot of problems with it, because a lot of us have had problems with compulsions and feeling trapped by it, you know. But one thing I celebrate is that I will be giving him the gift of just talking about it. I'm like, if you can just not be in isolation with something, it changes the entire situation.
Yes.
And so anyway, so girls and guys, men and women, a lot of us watch pornography. This is just a reality of our time, and I think it's been a reality for a long time. One thing I think is interesting about the narrative that it's only for men, or men are the only people who have problems with it or are interested in it even, is the subtle sort of patriarchal narrative that men are sexual and women are emotional. You know, and as we know, that's incredibly reductive for both
sides.
Yes.
Yep.
And so I love just what I do in part when I talk about it publicly to begin to break that narrative down, not just for women. They're like, there are women out there that love to look at a D, okay, or a V or whatever they want to see. But there are also men out there that are not, men are not animals in the way that they're painted. And I hate that that's the narrative for little boys too. And then little boys who aren't interested in that are like, what's wrong with me? I don't care about seeing naked bodies. Is there a problem?
Yeah.
I hate that whole binary narrative. I think it's just absolutely destructive and reductive. So I like to talk about that too quite a bit, because I think hidden in our commentary on these things in society is our reductionism and our patriarchal views.
Yeah, big takeaways from what you just shared, which thank you so much for sharing all of that. It was super helpful, is that we should talk about it.
Yes.
Right? Like, let's have some conversations about it. So that goes for parents, caretakers, that goes for friends, that goes for people in community with each other. We can have much better conversation. We can avoid the compulsive addictive behaviors if we just talk about it and say, hey, this is something I have a proclivity towards, and I don't like it. I don't want it, right? If that's something that you don't want to have. And I'm with you on the science. Like, I felt it in my own life. I have a wonderful, wife and family, and I've been married to my wife for 11 years. And I know that there have been seasons where there's been less intimacy because I've not been taking care of myself and I've been seeking elsewhere, right? And we've had talks about that, and we've had to work through that. And so I know the connections, right?
Yeah.
And so, but the longer if there's no talking about it, and there's no bringing it to light, then you do start believing all the lies about it, that men are animals, and that, this is, I'm not worthy to work or to have a family or to do these things in the light because of what I do in the dark.
Yeah, and I think, again, just removing the shame narrative out of it and saying, like, this is not a thing that makes you, doesn't make anyone bad that they're attracted to pornography or turned on by that. It's totally normal, And I think just that is what keeps people. Shame drives addiction, and it compounds it. And so one thing that's really important to me, and what I talked about at Q quite a bit, is that I think the task of parents, the task of anyone who is trying to address this topic, for children, for young adults, for anyone, is to really call the shame out and say, this is not a good thing. Like, your shame is crippling you. And we've contributed to that as a culture, shaming people for their sexual tendencies and desires. And I think that needs to stop. No one gets, quote unquote, free of an addiction to anything by shame. It doesn't happen. It's always the opposite. When you go through AA, and I haven't been through AA, but I've done CODA, which is Codependency Anonymous. It's an AA-based program. And one of the sort of main thrusts of the whole thing is really acknowledging your deep dignity. And, it's not attached to your actions. The you that underlies your actions is always worthy of love, of acceptance, and of all of the things that we all deserve. And so, but that's not really how the church has historically handled the pornography thing, at least not in my experience. And so my main thing is, like, give kids permission to talk, model it for them, don't intersect shame with this topic, because it does nothing to free people.
Wonderful. I love that. Okay, Catholicism.
Sure.
Here's how I want to address this. Because of who I am, and because a lot of the people that followed me pre this podcast, there are a lot of people listening to this podcast that don't give a shit about the church or religion, but a lot of them do, because they, they came along with me, right? And so many of the people, I'm not going to say everybody, but so many that are listening, it's been a rough 3 years. It's been a rough few years. Both, I say 3 because I'm pointing out just this political mess that we're in. I'll just say mess, the G-rated version of what's going on. But just the sex scandals and all this, and this is not just with the Catholic. This thing that came out last week with the Baptist Church, right? That was a huge, enormous shit show of what's been kept under wraps for years and years and years in the Baptist Church, right? But so talk to me about your journey as a Catholic and kind of where you are today and why, if you're still in it, why you're still in it, why are you holding on for dear life? Just share a little bit of that with us.
So I became a Catholic almost 12 years ago. I was coming out of I was in a season of extreme upheaval in my personal life. My parents' marriage was imploding. There was a lot of going on around that was incredibly painful, and I was privy to most of because I was living at home, and I was just starting to really acknowledge my deep questions about existence and about God. And honestly, though, I was still very much a fundamentalist when I became a Catholic, and I think I can look back at it now with compassion, but also honesty, and say, wow, you really became a Catholic in large part because you thought that you didn't have to think for yourself anymore. You wanted someone to tell you what everything was and how everything works and what was true and what wasn't true. I was very attracted to this idea that, at least the thing I was seeing, in my reading of apologetics and such, that the Catholic Church presents itself as the fullness of truth. Even though the Catholic Church has a really surprisingly open and tolerant, at least high-level viewpoint of other religions and of like how people get to heaven or whatever, they're much more apt to say things like God's truth exists everywhere and it's through Christ, but not necessarily. That person may not know that or have, that's how they have a little bit more of a universal Christ type view. But that wasn't the Catholic Church I was attracted to. I was very attracted to this idea that, here are all of these like pronouncements and dogmas and doctrines I don't have to question anymore. I can just go, someone else did all this work. What I now see is that I was really scared of what it meant, that I had so many questions and so many doubts, and I wanted to avoid them. I was like, please, someone just tell me, And so there was a lot there going on. That was a big part of why I was attracted to it, but there were some really beautiful things too. I was really attracted to the sacraments, to the physical encounter with the mystical, with the divine, that the sacraments are, or are thought to be. And I was very attracted to being part of something really old and really storied and really wide and rich and diverse, compared to where I was raised. The Catholic Church was like, what would I call it? I mean, it was like encountering Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And, African-American thought. And it was just such a wide berth of thinkers and of streams of tradition.
You become part of a much bigger family, right? A global family versus like your little
yes. And I remember just loving going to Mass in other countries and in another language and still knowing where we were.
Yeah.
Because the liturgy is the same, has been the same for thousands of years. I found a lot of deep personal comfort in that. Like it really contextualized my humanity in a way that I hadn't experienced up until that point. So there was some, it was a mixed bag. I was, as we all do, we make decisions from our particular lens. And at that time I had a lot of unhealed woundedness and a lot of fear, but I was also attracted to some really beautiful things. And so I will say, I think I hit a point, though, a few years in where the honeymoon period was over.
Sure.
And I suddenly hit up against the wall where I realized, oh, no, the Catholic Church is full of human beings.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not this, like, divinely guided, I'm probably disenfranchising myself from some of my Catholic listeners as I speak right now. I think I took the idea that the Catholic Church is guided by the Holy Spirit in all doctrine and protected from error very literally. I was like, yes, everything they teach is 100% absolutely true. Most of us who have been through any kind of being burned by a church can attest to the fact that that's not possible.
When human beings are involved.
Yeah.
When we get in the mix
is pure, in that way. And when we think it is, and when we finally encounter the reality, it can be a deeply painful, damaging experience. And I think I experienced that in several ways. And so now, fast forward a few years. Sorry, actually, I'm going to rewind. Fast forward and then rewind. I started deconstructing, like many of us in this kind of age group and outside this age group too, but a lot of people our age are doing and have done. I had to do it. It happened to me, I like to say. Some people in my life have been like, you and your deconstruction, you're always trying to tear things apart. I'm like, I don't think you understand. I hit a crisis point where if I didn't tear it all down, I was going to hurt myself or get ill. It was bad. I was psychologically tormented.
I've told people the same exact thing.
Yes. And so it was this or something like really drastic and terrible. I mean, honestly, I don't know what it would have been, but I was hitting a point where I was like, I am not okay, So I had to do it. And so I did it. And it took me a few years to feel like I had really sort of torn it all out, all the sort of scaffolding and all the furniture and all of the things that I had jimmied together to medicate my existential dread and like all of the fundamentalist, legalistic worldviews. And I sort of felt like I finally hit a point maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago where I looked around and I was like, it kind of looks like scorched earth now. I feel like I've removed everything I can. So now I need to look around at the ground and see what's here. And all of this is happening, by the way, while I am basically a professional Catholic, a professional public Catholic.
Yeah.
So that in itself,
you're playing at like World Youth Day and like you're
and I'm
very
feeling
public.
like a hypocrite, because I'm like, I think people think I'm this, I don't know what, but I know from what they tell me sometimes that I've been their spiritual companion and I have been their guru or guide in some way, or even just a friend like along the road, and they feel so represented by me. And I'm thinking like, if we sat down and had coffee, I don't know if you would feel that way.
Yeah.
But I chose to press forward. I had a little voice in my head that said, like, you're being yourself. You'll get to a place where you can talk about this publicly, but you have to do this work, And so I looked around, I feel like a couple of years ago, and looked and at the ground and saw little seedlings popping up. And it turned out that I wanted to be a nihilist because it sounded more simple, to be frank. I was like, wow, that would be great if it was just that black and white, that nothing means anything. All I can do is ultimately do what I think is best, but it doesn't mean anything. That felt like a relief to me after years of everything meaning everything. I was scrupulous to an extreme where I was like, every little thing means so much. Like it means heaven or hell. It means right or wrong. It means God's love or God's hatred. It means, the stakes were so high for everything for me for my whole life. And so the stakes going away felt like a relief. But I kind of meandered there for a while and found it to be pretty bleak, to be honest. So I'm like, oh, now I don't know if I even love my kids or not. I don't know. Is love real? Yeah. And I'm like, now I'm laying awake worrying about that. And so I decided that I wanted to practice faith in some way. I knew it wouldn't look like what it had looked like before, but I really wanted it. I felt drawn to it. I felt compelled by it. I felt drawn to Jesus. I felt drawn to the Christ. I felt drawn, well, frankly, to many expressions of spirituality. It called to me from across the scorched earth of my inner landscape. And so I started to reorder. I had to do the disorder season.
Yep.
And now I'm in the reordering season. I'm still a Catholic. I mean, I'm a baptized and confirmed Catholic, so I'm still a Catholic. But I have absolutely expanded my understanding of what it means to be a person who walks with God. We can talk further about that, but yeah, that is where I stand now.
Do you would others consider you still where you are? Are you still in?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I would hope so, because I would hope that anyone of goodwill. Yeah, that's a sore spot for me, to be honest. I sort of don't. I used to measure my standing or my belonging by whether other people thought I belonged. I would call it a type of spiritual codependency, when you sort of find yourself holding out your heart and your thinking, your beliefs, your fears, your whatever, to a bunch of people and saying is it okay? Can I be here? Am I allowed? Am I in? I feel like a lot of spiritual communities are like that.
Yep.
Your orthodoxy is your belonging. Do you fit do you toe the lines that we have decided are the most important? And if so, then you're one of us. And if not, then you don't belong here. That is a very flipped upside down model from what I think Jesus modeled. So it's like behave and believe in order to belong. That's what we practice typically. I don't think that should be the metric. Yeah. So I don't know I don't know who would say I'm in. I know a lot of people already consider me heterodox at best.
Yeah.
Heretic at worst.
Yes.
And I've just decided not to care.
Yeah.
That is not, they don't sleep in bed with me at night, and they don't live in my conscience, and they don't, they can have their opinions and they're allowed to, but it just doesn't have a bearing on where I go and what I do.
What I think is important about what you just shared is something that I went through, which was the deconstruction happened. And I'm very grateful for that. Like you said, it had to happen. For me, it was either deconstruct or leave the whole fucking thing. Like just leave. And I didn't want to. Similarly to you, I'm very attracted to Jesus. I'm very attracted to what he wants us to do in the world. I think he's behind it all. So leaving it all was not, it was an option, but it wasn't really an option. But I had to reconcile so much of what was happening. I had to figure out, how does this all fit in? Like, I understand that I'm not not everything's going to make sense, but everything doesn't make sense right now. Mm-hmm. Like, nothing makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I've got to deconstruct. For me, the important part was reconstructing. I didn't want to stay deconstructed. So many of my friends have deconstructed and never reconstructed, and that's fine for them if that's where you need to stay. But for me, the important part was, as soon as everything was deconstructed, to maybe not start reconstructing right away, but to start thinking about the reconstructing. Like, okay, I am a house down to the studs right now. I was a pretty rickety old house. They took me down to the studs. What are we going to do with this? I think this house still has good bones. What are we going to do with it? Mm-hmm. That was super important to me to let's start shaping the house again.
Yeah. So, I love that. Yeah. I think everyone's path truly is different. Some people, I think, need to be wandering in the wilderness. Honestly.
Yeah.
And this is the thing I have learned. There is no such thing as being behind. Everywhere you are right on time. So if you're wandering in the wilderness right now, that's where you're supposed to be. There's some mystical way in which this is true. I feel pretty convinced of it, because what I know is that no amount of nagging or no amount of convincing from someone else or whatever will ever convince you or me to change until something in us says, I want to change.
Yeah, so true.
I want things to be different.
It's so true.
I want to walk this way instead of that way. So until that happens, then you are where your heart's desire is leading you, right? And it's like, I don't mean that to say that everything is great and everything everyone does that's self-destructive or whatever. It's not what I'm saying, but I think
there are healthy and unhealthy versions in there. But
sure,
still,
but I think
that the truth is still there.
Yeah, you cannot go anywhere that your you doesn't want to go. Your deepest you, your true self and your shadow self are wrestling inside you to various degrees at all times. And I just think you reconstructing and you reordering and me doing that, it only happened when our true self said, I'm ready. And there's no amount of proselytizing or nagging that anyone else can do to make that happen. And some people, they deconstruct and they really need to walk around for a really long time without building anything else. And that's their path. I just have I don't think you do either, but I have no investment anymore in emotionally or otherwise in changing that about anyone,
100%.
That never works for me.
Nope.
When someone's like, I'm so stressed by your...
Yeah.
I mean, I get that a lot. Like my Instagram DMs, I'll give you an example.
Please
I'm not calling anyone out by name, okay? But I posted a video yesterday or 2 days ago, at the time of this recording, of myself at a Gungor show. Mm-hmm. For those who aren't familiar, Gungor is a band that has been just through the ringer in terms of people being really scared about what they believe or don't believe. And they had the whole deconstruction phase, and now they're reordering, and they run the Liturgist podcasts, and it's whatever. So there's this whole connotation to it for a lot of Christians, because they used to understand what they believe, and now they're like, what do you even believe about it? Anything.
Yep.
And I posted a video of being there. just a video of them singing Beautiful Things, which is one of my favorite songs still.
It's amazing.
And got a few DMs from people, and they were like, hey, quick question. Very obviously from a stressed place. You know, he said that he believes the resurrection is metaphorical. Do you believe that too? Hope you can answer that for me. And I'm thinking, I have so much, it didn't make me angry. I just thought it's amazing how stressed we can get by what other people think.
Yeah, you being at a show, doing your own thing in Nashville,
Yes.
Tennessee, stressing this person out in Milwaukee.
Yeah, they're
wherever.
laying in bed somewhere.
Right. Truly.
Feeling worried.
Yeah.
Or
Worried,
anxious.
annoyed, anxious, the whole thing.
And I thought, I have done that so much in my life, and I'm done.
Yeah.
I have chosen a different way. Like, I choose, at least to try to practice, detachment from what other people choose, believe, think. And I mean that I have to. It causes so much stress in our lives when when our wholeness and our peace is predicated on other people. God, you only live with yourself, you know? And so that was just, it was so funny because I thought, yeah, I mean, I've done that. I'm not going to be angry about it, that this person is feeling this stress, but I wish they didn't.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah, it really is.
So you're a public person. I'm going to bring a few things kind of into the ring real quickly. So you're a public figure. You have the Catholic background. You have the your dad is a Syrian refugee background. Your family are Syrian refugees, and you've said before that it wasn't until the last season of your life that you actually thought about that, right? Because you know, even going back in your story, they didn't leave Syria because of a war or ICE or whatever. It was under different circumstances, and so it was only recently that had like a resurgence of importance in your life. And I think there's very obvious reasons why. What has the last few years meant to you? This new administration, the refugee ban, the different things that have been happening, the rising intolerance toward these amazing people that are coming to our country to seek a better home, to seek refuge, something that our country has always been about. But now there's this kind of like newfound anger and angst and toward these people that need to come here and want to come here, right? For very obvious reasons. What's the last few years been like for you? I've observed, you know, your social media presence, the things you've chosen to speak up about. What is just tell me about the last 2 or 3 years. Just what has it felt like? What do you care more about now? What are you more excited about speaking up about, those sorts of things?
Firstly, and I hope this doesn't come across as me correcting you because it's not intended that way at all. I
No,
want to,
go
but I
for it.
want to deepen maybe what you said,
Yeah.
your question even, because the Syrian civil war broke out about 7 years ago. So that was when I really started to become invested in Syrian American issues. I had always identified as an Arab, but because I'm white-skinned, I have passed as white my whole life in terms of what, and I say passed as white because what I mean is I passed as what other people consider to be white, which is it's a whole other topic. But
Yes.
Whiteness is a part of my experience, a huge part because of my skin color, you know, and all the privilege that comes with that. I enjoyed that my whole life. Wasn't aware of it because that's how whiteness works, right? So you sort of benefit from something that you can't see or feel. Other people can see or feel it because they don't benefit from it. But I've always identified as an Arab. And it's always been part of my life and part of my culture, part of my cuisine, part of, you know, how I eat, how I gather, how I listen to music, how I, you know, think about the world. It's part of my identity and part of my experience to a really deep level. But when the Syrian civil war broke out 7 years ago, so I guess that would have been during Obama's presidency, I started to speak up more about my Arab identity and my ethnicity, which, interestingly, with the last name Assad, you would have thought more people would have been aware.
They made the connection, right?
And they really weren't until I started talking about it. And when I started talking about it publicly, I was treated to a lot of people's opinions about Arabs as a quote unquote race. They're not really a race, but I think all of this angst and anxiety and fear of Arabs has been here for a long time. This is not new. What is new is the sort of cultural awareness of how deep that runs. It's not the same as the racism that we see from whites about black people, but there are some parallels, which is that this administration has not birthed these things. It has certainly emboldened people. And I saw that happen, but before Trump was ever in office or running or a thought in my mind, I was already experiencing people's bigotry towards Arabs. And it was astounding to me, but it was a great wake-up call because as I woke up to that, as a person who's half Arab, I started to awaken to the general situation in our country of racial disparity, racial injustice, racism, whiteness. All of that came in tandem with my awakening about how people felt about Arabs. So I'm grateful that I experienced it. But it wasn't Trump that brought that up for me. I was, Obama was president and doing drone strikes in the Middle East. And he was very hawkish, to use a word that people love to describe Hillary as. Obama was quite, shall we say, active in the region in ways that I think were very problematic. And I loved him, but that was one thing that was really difficult.
Yes, problematic.
Yeah. So, the U.S. in general has a problematic history all over the world in our interventions and colonizations and occupations and all the things that we've done. The Middle East is no exception. So I think specifically though, since Trump became president, as your question actually asked, what have they been like? Whew. I can vividly recall the moment he was elected. I think a lot of us have stories like this. I was with my friends and my husband, and we were sitting in a room, and just honestly, we were sitting there as the night wore on, just quietly crying because we realized it wasn't just like, there's a new thing happening. We were like, this is what has been happening in our culture, and it is being manifested like the cap on a mushroom. These roots, the mycelium that like run the forest, the mushrooms have these like root systems that like intersect all over, they go miles long. That is what I think we were seeing the mushrooms sprout out of the ground, but the roots had been there, running the forest for a really long time. And so that was the moment there was a moment for me where I thought, I'm now seeing the fruiting of something in a new, I don't want to say in a new way, because I think, Black people have been experiencing this since 100%. They were brought here against their will. Yeah. This is not really new, but there was something that Trump brought that felt different, that felt, at least to me as a white person, it felt like a really big wake-up call to the situation. And in a way, I'm grateful for that awakening because I realized, one thing that Trump's presidency has done it has woken a lot of people up that were sleeping. And I'm sad that it took President Trump to awaken us or to awaken people, but I'm glad they're waking up.
Yeah. Jeremy Cowart and I have talked about this quite a bit, that the one good thing that has come out of the last few years is that we're now talking about the stuff, right? So I think back in the 50s and 60s civil rights movement, Ruby Bridges single-handedly desegregating schools, walking in, little girl, the iconic picture, and all the MLK and Rosa Parks, everybody. After that, I think a lot of people assumed racism was gone.
They went to sleep.
They're just gone. And it's like, no, now these people, they just stopped talking about it. They were still talking about it around their dinner tables and out at the barbecue and while they're smoking and drinking. They just weren't doing it in public anymore. And what Trump did was he gave people permission to, what they had been sort of hiding and keeping undercover for decades, they now had permission to sort of do it again. Talk about it. Yeah. Because, so many people are like, well, we don't have a politician in the White House anymore, so he's just speaking his mind. And it's like, well, that's not good. Like, I know how shitty of a person I am. Like, if I always, honestly, I know how, I'm just trying, just like everybody else. if I said everything that my brain was thinking about, and if I did everything my heart wanted to do, that would not be a good reality for anybody.
Well, let's differentiate for a second, though, between your heart and your shadow self. Because what we're talking about with Trump is that, I don't know, I'm not inside his body.
Sure.
My sense about him is that he is run by his shadow self. His true self is deeply hidden somewhere, way down under all of the shame and the ego and the machinations of the ego that we all experience, to different degrees. This is a man who is a shadow self running a country. I'm not going to say other politicians aren't partially that too, but there is a degree to which Trump exhibits that's scary to me. It's not just that he's speaking his mind, or that if you spoke your mind all the time, that would necessarily be dangerous. I think it depends on what is running you, And so I felt like a little nudge. I'm like, I don't want anyone to ever disparage their heart, because I think their heart is actually their, at its deepest level, it's their true self.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I think that Trump's heart is deeply buried between and beneath a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would never, and in a way, I have a lot of mercy for him as an individual. I am not excited that he's a president, but I wish that he would love himself. But that's a whole thing. Anyway.
Yeah. No, totally. No, I understand. I get that. I feel ever since like 6 months ago, I felt sorry for him. I felt bad for him way more than I've been angry at him.
Yeah.
He's got to be tormented. Like, that's not a good.
I hope so.
That's not a good life.
I feel like there's a point where some people get beyond the torment into just pure like numbness to their pain, and I wonder if he's there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really hope that we unseat him, though. I don't think that he is a good president. I hope that he doesn't die the way that he is today.
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm deeply pained and grieved over the suffering that he has through his presidency brought about for especially minority communities. Like I said, all those things probably aren't really new, but there's been an uptick we can see in hate crime and hate speech. And so it's deeply painful to acknowledge. But I hope that, like you said, and like I do believe that those of us who are awake will mobilize, like light a fire under our asses and go, I'm going to be more active as an individual and as a public person in the next election. And I'm going to try my best to help turn the tide a little bit, hopefully in a more sane direction.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. We've talked about so much, and how do you, as a person who is changing and transforming and deconstruction and reconstruction and all of these changes in your life and career, how are you in this sort of volatile season of, living in America with all of the baggage and the good, the bad, and the ugly? How are you channeling that into making the world better? Not trying to be the savior, not trying to, I've got to do it all, because there's so much shit to do and it's overwhelming. And it literally makes me sick when I think about the things within a stone's throw of this building we're in right now that need to be fixed and could be fixed, and we need to go after them, and I can't do it all. So in your own way, how are you doing that? How do you plan on doing that? I just want you to, you don't have to come up with anything crazy. Just like, I want it to be an encouragement to those listening.
Well, one thing that pops to my mind and immediately is that it would be really easy for me to hide in my whiteness because I have pale skin and say, like, you know what? I'm tired of experiencing people's attitudes about Arabs. I'm just going to stop talking about it for a while. And I take breaks. I can't always be under the onslaught. Like, everyone needs to remove themselves for a minute from the bigotry that they're experiencing. And this is all, like I said, relatively new for me. It's been a few years, it's been 7 years that I've really been experiencing it. So I take breaks, but I really feel called to be publicly Arab, it's so funny because my skin is light. My dad's skin is fairly fair as well, even though he's 100% Syrian. And a lot of it reveals a lot of even just the ideas and stereotypes people have about Arabs, just to even talk about that, because there are Arabs with red hair and blue eyes. And, Rami Malek won the Oscar last night at the time that we're recording this for Best Actor. He's Egyptian. He has, blue green eyes, and he was standing up there talking, and I was
he's not your stereotypical.
No, and I was overcome with emotion watching him, and his speech was so beautiful. If you haven't heard it, please go look it up. But I was looking at him, and I felt such a swell of love for my people.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there looking at his eye color and thinking, like, people really have one picture of what Arabs look like, what they do, what they believe, what they sound like. And you see it in all of the movies and the TV shows about terrorism and the Arabs in every. I mean, if you look at most movies made in America and Hollywood that involve Arabs involve one picture of what people. It's like one caricature of what people think Arabs are like. And so watching him speak, I felt so overcome because just by standing there, I think he broke some walls down. I mean, there was something so momentous about it for me. So one thing that I feel really called and compelled towards is being publicly Arab, being a face that people can look at. And I hope that just by standing out here, as myself, with my last name and with my heritage and with my advocacy for Syrians and for Arabs and for refugees in general, I hope that by doing that, by being myself publicly, that I will break walls down. And even if it's small ways in individual, people and their perceptions, it's important. So that's the biggest thing that pops into my mind is that I have embraced my identity as an Arab in large part to do the work of helping to humanize and to dignify, I guess, Arabs in people's minds and to break down stereotypes and the walls that people put up around those stereotypes. So that's how I give a damn every day.
That's beautiful work. You could easily, again, fair skin, you could easily hide. You could easily just kind of blend in, make your music, not ruffle any feathers. You also wrote, you shared a song on your Facebook, maybe you shared on other platforms, but Walking Your Way, which I thought was, everybody who's listening now should go Facebook, Audrey Assad, look for it. You described
it on SoundCloud as well.
Yeah, and SoundCloud. You described it as a prayer for all the mamas who have had their children separated from them at the borders of our country. Mother's love is fierce, enduring, and never gives up. Was there any particular thing that happened that caused you to write and then release that?
So, it was actually months ago. David Gunger, a friend of mine who's in the band called The Brilliants, wrote to me and said,
brilliant.
They are.
Sorry, no, they're really
incredible.
Good, though. They're good.
He wrote to me or texted me or something and was like, we're working on this record about dreamers because of the DACA thing that was going on. Do you have any songs that might make sense in a collection like that? And I didn't. And this song doesn't really either because it's not really about that, But I hung up the phone or what, I think we were talking on the phone. I hung up the phone. I pressed the hang up button.
That's right. And put down the receiver.
Yes. And, you have moments rarely as an artist where it feels like a song is delivered to you. And I just had a shiver of inspiration. And this is the song that happened in a very brief amount of time, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And I was just weeping because I think what I was experiencing was some kind of channeling of, in some way, the suffering of these mothers. Now, when I posted that song, I knew that I would be encountering and being treated to the opinions of a lot of people about brown people. It's interesting how unhuman they are to some in our country. Because I made no political statements in my post. I didn't say anything about Trump because you know what? Obama deported, I think, more people than any president before him. And I've said that publicly as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of problems with his movements in that area. I didn't say anything about Republicans or about white people, in my post. I posted about empathy and received a glimpse into a lot of people's anger and bigotry and hatred, honestly. And that's just educational because it reveals so much that when you post about a mother and her grief, you hear people shouting things back at you like, they're using their children as human shields. They did this to themselves. They need to go back and fix their countries. We don't need them here. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you're responding to things I didn't even say. Nope. And so it reveals so much that by me, I'm only posting a song that empathizes with them. So out of anything I ever post about, in all of my controversial opinions for the evangelical world anyway, nothing gets as much of a rise out of that section of the people who are following me, for whatever reason they're still following me, as immigration and refugee issues. It's really interesting and painful to note, but it's something that, again, I sort of feel called and compelled to keep doing it. It's like I hope, from a place of what I hope is relative wholeness and humility, continue to be obvious about the suffering of the brown and the black and the marginalized in the ways that my identity intersects with those communities, and even ones that that my identity doesn't totally intersect with, but that I can lift up voices from those communities and amplify them to the people who are following me. That feels really important to me. It feels like my life's work in some ways. I mean, I still I love the music. I think I'll always do that. But I can no longer do it apart from being publicly Arab and from amplifying black and brown voices. So, yeah, it feels like my calling in some way.
Well, everyone go listen to that song, and don't leave a shitty comment, please. If you're listening to this, you're probably not going to go leave a shitty comment.
Probably not.
Okay, many years from now, you are going to die. And I'm going to give your eulogy. So in front of your family and kids and friends and the people that have loved you and worked alongside you, and they're all in a big room, and we're celebrating and mourning your life, and I'm giving your eulogy. What do I say on that day?
What do you say?
Yeah. What do you want your life and legacy to be about? What do you hope that I would say, rather?
I hope that you say that she mothered the world. That's it.
Okay. Short, powerful eulogy. And then we'll go do what party? We'll have a celebration.
Yes.
She mothered the world.
I hope so. I hope to do that.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This was super fun.
Thank you for having me.
Dear friends, thanks so much for tuning into the podcast today. I hope you are encouraged by my conversation with Audrey Assad. Here is today's takeaway and challenge for you. Please make sure the people in your life feel 100% welcome to be vulnerable and authentic around you. Shame is a horrible and controlling tool, and people are the best versions of themselves when they don't feel shame and when they do feel love and acceptance. The best version of ourselves is required to be damn givers, because damn giving is hard and it requires time and energy and emotions and all of that. And as we give ourselves to the tasks at hand, the different ways we are loving and caring for the world, we cannot be weighed down by shame and guilt. So make sure the people around you feel 100% welcome to be vulnerable and authentic around you and around your community, so that you can do your best damn giving work. I also want to mention that if you're in Middle Tennessee, specifically Nashville, on March 8th, you need to go to a show hosted by Audrey Assad and another artist named Fernando Ortega. This night is primarily about Audrey and Fernando sharing songs and stories about their heritage as they explore how Christians can be peace bearers for those in need of refuge. This night will benefit my friends at Preemptive Love Coalition. If you've hung around me or the Let's Give a Damn family for any length of time, you'll know that I love Preemptive Love Coalition. Jeremy Courtney, their founder, has been on my podcast in the past. Go listen to that episode. To find out more about this show and to buy tickets, go to Audrey Assad's Facebook page, and you can also find the link in the show notes of this podcast. If you want to know more about this podcast conversation or about Let's Give a Damn in general, go to podcast.letsgiveadamn.com. If you love what we're doing on this show, tell a friend. Leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts Or consider giving us a few dollars each month to support the production and execution of this show by visiting patreon.com/letsgiveadamn. That's patreon.com/letsgiveadamn. We've come to the end. This podcast was edited and produced by the incredible Chad Snavely. The music is by the also incredible Propaganda. See you all next week. Peace.